Oh, hey guys, how is it going? Got another video here that's probably going to be a bit divisive, just like a lot of my other ones. But frankly, these are my honest opinions. I don't wish for any game to be disappointed in my eyes. And I will say this case I'm talking about today is on the milder side in terms of disappointments, but I just want to give kind of a summation slash review on Elden Ring. I beat it 2 days ago. I still be doing side content up to now. Still enjoying some of the side content, some of it not so much. Just to preface kind of this overview I'm going to give and just my feelings here. I have beaten every Souls game many times in some cases, particularly Demon Souls, Dark Souls 1, beaten Dark Souls 2 numerous times as well, and just all the others subsequently. My opinions tend to be a bit unpopular on the later games after Dark Souls 1, and it just is what it is. I mean, Dark Souls 2, there's a consensus generally that game was just a disappointment overall. But we're going to talk about Elden Ring. Now, Elden Ring's been getting insane praise. And frankly, in a gaming landscape that's kind of rife with all the nonsense we see nowadays, it is nice to see a game come out complete, for one, although that's an arguable topic that we'll get onto. But in terms of like, not trying to upsell you on additional content once the game's been purchased, this game doesn't do that. So it's got to get credit for that right off the bat, frankly. It's nice to have a complete game, to be able to go through a whole experience, get, up to 100 hours or more of content throughout the game, and not have, purchasable opportunities for microtransactions shoved down your throat, and just to have freedom of exploration. So let's get into some of this. I'm going to break it down in pros and cons. I want to talk about the game. So the pros we'll go through first. The world itself is really awesome. I mean, the initial exploration on your first playthrough, for me, that's like just something you can't recreate, especially in a Souls game. I mean, it's in any game, but in a Souls game, it tends to be really special. And I know this isn't a Souls game, but you know what I'm saying, a From Software game that's in that vein of design. Loved exploring the world. I really did. The exploration factor, finding all these new things, not having very limited guidance on where to go is something I tend to appreciate in most cases. Like just stumbling upon these really cool enemies or boss fights or locations it is fun. I mean, it just is. Like, what could you really say? The exploration here is great. The world is massive. It's way bigger than I thought it would be. And it's been really fun. On the first playthrough, it's been really fun just to explore the world and get acquainted with everything. Another pro would be visually. I think this game looks amazing. I don't know what most people are talking about, to be honest. Well, I wouldn't say most, but there's a lot of people downplaying the visuals. I mean, from a technical standpoint, yeah, it doesn't have the best texture work and things like that, even though a lot of the textures are pretty damn good. Artistically, this game just has it down. Like, it looks really, really good. And I go as far as to say it's one of my favorite looking games ever. It's a joy to look at throughout. Of course, complementing then the world and the graphics both. You've got a variety of locations too. You've got snowy mountains. You've got different styles of forests and landscapes, fields, all different. It's funny because a lot of the like fieldy, foresty landscapes you go through or areas, they all feel just different. They all have that sense of uniqueness. Like, you know exactly where you are. It could be the leaves and trees and grass is all differently colored. The skybox is different. But even beyond that, you've got all sorts. You've got swamps. Again, you've got snowy mountains. You've got fiery volcano-like areas. You've got sewers. You've got caves to explore, like various types of caves and dungeons. It's really good and it looks really good, which is the main point here. But the world itself, like, very much complementary in a lot of ways. Although some of these points I'm bringing up, particularly with the world, might be a bit of a double-edged sword in my opinion, but I'll get to that in the cons. So, third point, and this is definitely a double-edged sword in my opinion, and it's a pro, first of all, so the variety of abilities and ashes you get are really cool. The ash system in particular for your weapons, typically for standard weapons, because you amend the skill the weapon has, which can't be done with like special weapons that have like this inherent skill. So you've got like a separation there. So I went dual scimitars. I started swordsman. I really like scimitars throughout From Software games. So I was like, I'm gonna do dual wielding scimitars with maybe a shield if I need it for like parrying and whatnot. And I enjoyed the game like that. Customizing your ashes on the scimitars. I had one that was a bleed and then one that scaled with dexterity. And on occasion, I would switch the one that scales with dexterity to like having two bleed scimitars, which is pretty cool as well. But for the most part, I went bleed, dex scaling. Spin and slash, sword dance were two of my favorites, funnily enough, even though sword dance well, spin and slash you get early on. That's like the first one you get. Just really quick and direct, but there's all sorts of customization options. Ability-wise, you've got tons of incantations and sorceries. You've got all these unique weapons, like I mentioned, with their own unique inherent skills that you can use, which could spice things up as well. So the variety on display here is great. Like on paper, just looking at everything you've got to use and to play with is fantastic. And that leads into the general customization to cosmetics, and of course, like I mentioned, weapon choices. Fantastic, really varied. I love, like, just about all the armor sets look fantastic in this game. The last pro is probably the biggest double-edged sword, but some of the bosses are a lot of fun. Some of them, that's where we go into the cons. And again, as I prefaced earlier, I'm not somebody who's just jumped into Elden Ring and thinks, oh, it's too hard. Not the case at all. I've played all the other games, so I understand how these games function from a balancing perspective, how the engine works, and how it's set up for mostly one-on-one encounters. So let's get on to the cons, which I'm sure most people will be interested in here. So first of all, technical issues in the game and the engine itself. This is just objective right now, this part particularly. So crashes happened to me a few times on PC. I had my game freeze. Launching issues, possibly because of the easy cheat system in the game, which can be disabled if you aren't playing online, but I want to play online, so I kind of need to have that on. But regardless, there's issues beyond just the launching of the game, with easy cheat being a potential problem. I believe it is the issue. But again, crashes, general bugs, frame rate hitches, things like that, transitioning hitches like into new areas and stuff can happen. And this, I played on PC, but apparently it can happen on the consoles too. And the thing is, this game's getting 10 out of 10s, which I just think is disingenuous on the part of, quote, professional reviewers, if they're not mentioning these things or just overlooking them in favor of, oh, well, I love the game, therefore it's a 10 out of 10 in my eyes. I just think that's, again, disingenuous. It's just discourteous to people reading your review and hoping for an objective analysis of the game. This kind of stuff should be mentioned. Aside from that, there's general bugs in the game as well. Now, this has been a thing in From Software games since Demon's Souls. Enemies hitting through walls, but in this game, I just noticed it more egregiously. Particularly, there was a scenario with the Iron Maiden enemies, which are pretty cool enemies too. I really like the designs. But I was going through a window. I was running past one, went through a window. There was like a part of a tower, like a circular tower. Was inside the little window. And that enemy hits me, throws this chain and hits me straight through the wall. Not through the window, mind you, through the wall. So clipping issues are still here, unfortunately. I think it's just a flaw in the engine that they've not fixed. They've decided not to fix, shouldn't be in the game. That's only one example as well. Another example of this would be the giant rolling ball enemies in one of the underground areas, one of the Eternal Cities, busted as well. So I had one in a doorway, just sitting there trying to get me because they follow you around. And on my screen, it was stationary. Completely stationary, wasn't moving at all. Just sitting there, trying to get in, obviously, but wasn't even moving. So I go to hit it, because you can actually attack those things and destroy them, and it one-shots me from full health. That stuff's not acceptable in any game, let alone a game which prides itself on difficult but fair encounters. Things like that, just, for me, take me out of it, and it's like, well... Like, oh great, I guess I'll learn from that next time. Like, it just puts a sour taste in my mouth when nonsense like that happens. And again, this is a game that's been getting 10s out of 10s all over the place, which I just think is unwarranted. Beyond any technical misgivings anyway, there's other things. So this is one of the biggest things that I know is going to get a lot of people divided and probably arguing with me. So the extreme difficulty of the game is completely misguided, and I think Miyazaki has been influenced by his co-director Tanimura from Dark Souls 2 fame, by the way. I can see Tanimura's touch all over the optional content in this game, I'll say that right now. And I think because he's president of From Software, I'm pretty sure Bamco have been in his ear as well and have influenced his decisions in the design process of the game. So yeah, that level of difficulty they've implemented, and not necessarily just difficulty. People have to understand there's difficulty that is fair to the player, but then there is difficulty that just is not. And to be more specific, most of my concerns here are to do with the side content, but I don't think that's an excuse. You know, it's side content that's in the game. They consciously made the design decision to put these bosses together. So an example of one of these bosses is there's an enemy called the Crucible Knight, which is a really cool enemy, really fun in one-on-one encounters, and it's clearly designed for a one-on-one encounter with the player. They put two of these in a boss fight together. And the problem here is obviously their moves don't synergize to the point where you can separate them reliably. And there's other boss fights like that, like the Gargoyles too, which is just a joke. It just consists of the player running away to try their best to separate these enemies, or to use the new summoning system. And with that being said, let me get into that, because that's one of my biggest complaints about the whole game as well. In this game now, they've introduced the ability to summon NPC allies, which on paper sounds cool. For a lot of other games, that would be a cool concept. So they're called FP summons. Well, more specifically, they've got a specific name. I think it's something of Ashes. I can't remember because there's a reason I can't even remember, because I barely use them. The only one I remember using was the Mimic. Didn't really use the others throughout the game. The problem is, this side content they've made and some of the bosses are clearly prodding you to use these AI summons. And the thing is, I think the game's been balanced around that, and I just don't like it. I know I'm not alone on this. Like, I know for a fact I cannot be alone on this. When I play these games for the first time, I like to be able to solo every encounter. Some of these encounters, it seems like you just need the distraction, because it's not like a boss like Ornstein and Smo, where one's slow, one is fast, so you can separate them quite reliably throughout the fight, and it's not that hard to deal with once you get the hang of it. There's so much RNG in these encounters. Another boss example is Commander Neil as well, is an absolute garbage fight. Complete garbage, putting three enemies together like that. But there's other examples too. There's crystalline enemies they put three of together, which obviously aren't made to be encountered like that or fought like that. These kind of bosses are all over the place, and to use these FP summons, you need to activate these statues to get the summoning pool active. So these statues are typically, in some cases, outside of boss rooms. And how can that be anything but a hint that, oh, well, you should be using your FP summons? The system is just bad, in my opinion, for this engine they're using, because it just means all that's going to happen is the summon's going to go distract the boss, get the aggro for the boss, and then you can just hit the boss in the back. And then just run away, let the bot take the aggro again. That's terrible. I'm sorry, I'm surprised people aren't talking about this much. That's just lame as hell. There's a really cool boss in the game that's both cool and pretty bad, called Radahn, General Radahn. Super cool fight to look at, just a super cool concept, like the massive like desert you're fighting him in. It's really awesome, it looks amazing. But there's summon signs all over the place. Doing that boss without summons is an absolute chore because of his moveset. It can be done, but clearly because there's summon signs all over the area, that's what they're trying to say. Well, you should probably just summon for this boss. They've set it up in a way with the Radahn fight where it's like, oh, it's this festival, you know? So all of you are banded together to take this guy down. It's unique, and it's probably one of the more excusable ones because the boss is just insanely hectic. And they kind of set it up to say, this is a co-op fight. You should work with other people to take this guy down. You don't have to, but you should. It's one of the less egregious examples, to be fair. I think the side content is just way worse, and I just don't like this prodding of, oh, you should just, you should summon someone to help you. You know, it's really hard, so you should just summon someone. These kind of encounters just don't feel balanced towards a person wanting to play the game solo and not rely on summons to take aggro. I just don't see how that makes an interesting fight. I just don't. I'm sorry. Like, it really doesn't. It's boring. It's boring. Like, the boss doesn't have any means of doing anything to you. It doesn't have these kind of counters you need to keep an eye out for. There's some AoE attacks that have long wind-ups, but that's about that's about all of it, you know? So yeah, I just don't like the FP summoning system. The Mimic is the one that I think is the most enjoyable, if you want to put a label on any of them, like that's positive, because I mean the mimic copies your character, like it copies your build, it copies what your loadout is, your weapons, your spells, and I think that's a cool concept. But again, I'll never be on board with this idea that we'll just put the summon out to distract the boss while you do the damage in the background and then run away before it gets its aggro and sights on you. I just think that's terrible. Honestly, I just don't like it. Beyond that, I mentioned character building being really flexible as a pro earlier. Variety of moves, abilities, weapons, blah, 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 which is all cool on paper. Part of the problem is, I want to mention this first, bosses have too much health in this game. I just don't know what they're thinking, honestly. It makes it to where most incantations and sorceries are not viable, especially in single player. If you go in solo, you can't do, like, the really strong spells, like Azure Comet, and things that actually have proper wind-up, so you need to be stationary for to actually do real damage. You just can't reliably do them. Whereas, I just go back to like previous games, like Demon Souls and Dark Souls. If you had a good magic build, you could annihilate everything in the game with complete ease, because it's like Miyazaki said, and this is why I think he's lost sight of all of this stuff and why he's just feeding into people saying, oh, well, we love the games because they're hard. I just think he's honestly lost his way in terms of like the balancing and the concept of difficulty in his games. Like, if you look at Demon Souls and Dark Souls, he's said repeatedly, difficulty wasn't the point. Difficulty is a tool to get you invested in the world and to learn about mechanics. But once you learn about mechanics in this game and what the good builds are and all that, it still doesn't feel adequate. Well, adequate might be the wrong word. It doesn't feel like I'm being adequately rewarded for learning these things when the boss has like 10,000 plus HP. And my big spell does 2,000 damage. Wow, that's amazing. I don't feel like it feels as rewarding as it should for learning these things. And I think part of that as well is a byproduct to attempt to balance PvP. That's what I think. I just think they don't want to have people running around one-shotting everyone in PvP, which I understand. But again, as a solo player, playing this game solo, trying to get really powerful is quite difficult. And again, the most powerful spells in the game require you to be still, and you just don't have iframes during these moves, or hyper armor even. You can stack as much poise as you want. Enemies do so much damage, you're not going to be able to sit there while a boss batters you. On top of that, let's not forget to mention the level of insane investment you need into a single stat to be able to use even some of these spells, particularly the strongest ones. A spell costing 70 intelligence is just ludicrous, in my opinion. That's just insane. Granted, respecking is an option in the game. You've got a limited number of respecs, mind you, so if you want to experiment with things, you better make sure you're making some really well-informed choices, to say the least. But even so, a build centered around like having 70 intelligence, again, to cast these spells, you need to be stationary too, so you're kind of being pigeonholed again into using your FP summons to attract aggro. And poise only takes you so far with that as well. I feel like while the building's flexible, most of the spells are mostly viable against mob enemies that just don't have insane HP, or if you have summons again to distract the boss, which I think is just, again, my thoughts on that, I think is terrible, personally. Now, one more thing I want to mention. This is, again, something I mentioned as a pro. Double-edged sword, in my opinion, is, again, relating to customization. So the amount of ashes and abilities and stuff, and even enchantments on weapons. All good stuff on paper, but I do feel like, ultimately, it's kind of a mistake. People are probably going to be like, oh, what are you talking about? I just don't feel like being able to change your weapon enchantment or scaling on the fly just eliminates the entire process of learning the game and making important decisions. Like, I know it's not the same game as previous Souls games. I know that. It's not the same game. They're changing it. They've changed so much, right? It's its own thing. I understand. That doesn't mean I have to like it. That's the thing. And I stand by that. I think being able to change your weapon enchantment with no downside whatsoever and amending your scaling to fit your build, yes, it helps new players immensely. It does. And people that might make mistakes. Like, I didn't mean to put these points in this stat. I don't want to use these kinds of weapons. But, part of Souls originally was about learning this stuff. And, as a result of being able to allowing you to change all your scaling and enchantments on the go, I just feel like this game's not going to be as replayable as the others. When you can do everything in one playthrough as far as your character's abilities go and your gameplay of that character, like, I feel like I've done everything I want to do in my one character. I don't know, like, outside of co-op or PvP, I don't know if this game's going to have legs, particularly. Not like the other games. So honestly, that is about it for my kind of initial thoughts on the game. Don't get me wrong, overall I really like it. Like, if you compare it to a lot of other modern games, it shits all over them. It really does. Like, the sense of exploration, the freedom you have to explore, the lack of hand-holding they're all really good qualities in my eyes. I love just scouring this world and finding new things. My only thing is, I feel like once you've done that the first time, again, I just don't think this game's going to have the same legs, in my opinion, unless you get into PvP and maybe co-oping with other people through stuff. I mean, that stuff is ongoing fun, potentially. Mostly PvP, I'd probably say. But I think, again, to just summarize this, I think Miyazaki is out of focus on the difficulty tuning for the game. Like, just because it's side content, that doesn't mean, we'll just throw all these enemies together and the player can work it out and it'll just be RNG if you're going solo. You gotta hope these enemies don't do these two moves at the same time, around the same time. You gotta separate them, run around the environment. That's literally Dark Souls 2 design philosophy for most of the bosses in that game, and that's garbage. Like, I can clearly see where Tanimura's input has been as a co-director in the game. And it's really unfortunate. So yeah, that's honestly pretty much it, guys. My concerns don't just range from our imbalancing in encounters to where they're trying to tell you, well, you should probably just sum of this fight, because we didn't really consider some of the optional content and how solo players might overcome the obstacles, be it RNG or otherwise. Also, like, I mentioned this as a pro, like, the joy of exploring the world for the first time is certainly there, but the map itself, like, when you boil it down, is, compared to previous games, feels a little bit flat. Just in terms of how it's interconnected, how it weaves together, how the shortcuts work to different areas. I mean, you do have the ability to go to later areas early on through, like, teleporters and things like that. It's just not as interesting to me. I think if you compare it to, like, Dark Souls 1, which is like a giant interconnected cobweb of a game, all up and down, so much verticality and so much to consider, like, around every corner and through every shortcut. I feel like the best way to summarize how I feel about Elden Ring's map itself, fun but flat. I just don't feel like this map has the same depth as prior games. People might say I'm crazy on that, like, what the hell are you talking about there as well? I can only speak from my experience and how I honestly feel. Like, this whole video has been a summation of my honest thoughts. I'm not going to BS anyone. And that's just it, guys. So that's pretty much it for now then. Again, this is like a first impressions type video, so there's probably some stuff I've missed on the pro side as well as the con side. Maybe. I'll probably add some comments down below, but for now, I'll see you guys later. Take care. One more thing I want to add very quickly. Sorry, guys, I'm just adding this post the video after making it, but I wanted to mention this too because it's pretty important to me. It's a shame I didn't mention it before, but the soundtrack in this game, I can't be the only one who finds it forgettable. And that's a problem, honestly, when the music in the prior games, pretty much all of them, even ones I wasn't a big fan of, like Bloodborne, has some really memorable songs like Ludwig, Father Gascoigne, the Cleric Beast, Vicar Amelia, all really unique and memorable tracks that stand out by themselves. I can't remember any boss song in Elden Ring. I don't know, for me that's a problem. I don't think any of these songs are going to be like, well, they're certainly not instant classics to me at least, but in any case, that's all I've got to say for now, guys. I will talk to you down below, and take care.